issues. I asked. Hey, what's up, guys? Dave Duford here, Final Expense Agent Mentor. Wrapping up a most profitable week. Got done with 11 applications written off of about, I think, 27, 26 appointments. So pretty happy with today's results. But I'm not here to talk about that today. Actually, the reason for today's recording is really to talk about the difference between a prospect versus a suspect. So first of all, I want to thank Brian for coming along from South Carolina on a nice ride along with me. Got to see the good, bad, and ugly as it relates to final expense in a ride-along session. And, of course, we had some resistance, to be quite truthful with you. Kind of tougher leads today, tougher opportunities. Did make a few sales, nothing dramatic like the first part of the week, if you saw that interview right along with Steve. But regardless, lots of training and value nevertheless. So one of the things that we talked about in so much of a context is the difference between a prospect and a suspect, and what that really entails as a final expense agent, and how you should construct and operate in the context as a final expense salesperson. So for you guys that are new to final expense or new to sales, the difference between a prospect and a suspect is that a prospect is by default somebody who fits the criteria of being a buyer. Doesn't mean they will buy, but they fit the main criteria, whatever they may be, defined as the criteria for somebody to buy. A suspect, is somebody who meets all of them but one. Now, they could meet only a few or none at all, but a suspect is somebody who can be almost a prospect but doesn't meet some particular piece of criteria. So here's what I mean. Perfect example, I had a couple of sales calls today where the people we met with met the criteria of what I would consider to be a potential prospect, except one or two particular issues or instances. So first of all, ran a call today. I'll give you two. First of all, I ran a sales call today, and the first one was a husband and wife. Expressed interest. They were curious about what the final expense program was all about. And upon doing some fact finding, we discovered that they have insurance from work, which was a flexible, adjustable, universal life policy, which basically means there would potentially be an end date to the plan later on down the line. I showed them all this stuff. I showed them their annual report. And the wife also had a mortgage protection plan. And so what happened was, I asked him, I said, and I call this the devil's advocate technique, just because what I have discovered doing thousands upon thousands of final expense presentations is that very few people who have good and adequate coverage actually are interested in anything more. And again, I'm only boxing in final expense prospects because that's all I know. This may be different for another life insurance field, and I'm sure it is. But final expense buyers are primarily motivated by premium, more specifically by what and how much they're paying. Everything else typically comes second. It's hard to say that, but you can do a very good presentation on building value. You may have somebody who has term insurance, and they can obviously make conceptual sense of why whole life is better, but if they just can't afford the difference, they just can't afford the difference. And it's going to be hard to take somebody from $50,000 in term to $10,000 in whole if they have predefined reasons to have more than that, or to just feel like any less than what they currently have at the $50,000 level is not worth having. So the reason I mention this is because this particular couple had all of this. They had a curiosity. And so I asked them the devil's advocate, which is congratulating them on what they have and really plainly asking them, why would you really want any more than what you got? And I say it in a not snarky way, because what I'm trying to do is get the prospect to sell me on selling them. If I ask somebody, hey, you've got great coverage, why do you feel like you need more? It's kind of an assumptive question. But if they can answer that question coherently and persuasively, then my findings have been 95% of the time they're not a prospect. And again, it's hard to explain this to somebody who comes from another profession where there's products where you build value around it or you can differentiate. Whole life insurance is pretty straightforward amongst all the different carriers out there, so there's not a lot of differentiation you can do. You certainly can and should in some circumstances. But ultimately, people don't splurge on life insurance. They buy enough to do what is necessary and then spend their money on other things that they like to splurge on, like booze and smokes. Life insurance, unfortunately, just isn't splurged upon. So I say all this because we ran a couple of these appointments, and unfortunately, they didn't pan out. They kind of concocted some reason, meaning, they said, well, I wanted to get a separate plan to possibly bury myself and leave the rest of the money to kids. And that kind of sounds like a good idea, but everything that sounds good is always tested by the ability to pay, which is what always things come down to. So I say all this because it took me a long time to realize this as a final expense producer, that what you're trying to find out in the final expense game, your goal is to find not the person that you need to sell life insurance on. There's the old saying that life insurance is sold, it's not bought. There's a grain of truth to that. But when we look at final expense specifically, I tell a lot of agents this. If I have to walk into a 60-year-old or a 70-year-old's house, or basic prospects we sell to, and I have to sit them down and say, hey, look, have you ever heard of this thing called final expense life insurance? You're like, no, I've never heard of life insurance. What is that? Well, it's great. You croak and you get money. It's great. And they're like, well, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. I get to take the money with me, right? No, actually, you leave it to a friend or a family member and they pay for your burial. Oh, wow, that's great. Now, how many times has any of us as agents ever run into the occasion of that? None. Nobody ever sees that. What happens, though, and this is where my aha moment came from, is when we run appointments and ask them what were your thoughts and concerns as to sending the card in, the people who buy, you can tell pretty quickly. They say, look, I'm not getting any younger. My wife died. My husband died. My friend died. I saw how much it cost. I was shocked at how much I had to pay. We're still paying on it. It was horrific, blah, 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 so on and so forth. They know the importance and they know the cost of burial. You don't have to sell them on why the pains are because they've experienced it. So the aha moment was, bottom line, my job as a final expense salesperson, my job is not to sell them on the needs to have life insurance. If I have to do that, there's serious problems with the prospect. My job is to sell them on why they need to buy the plan from me versus the alternative. Now, it's a subtle difference with some underlying underpinnings that need to be clarified. This presumes, when we ask this question, the differentiation point, that they already know what life insurance is, and they do. People have a generic idea of what it is to a certain extent. And you don't need and shouldn't need to explain the inner workings. They just know that when someone dies, somebody gets paid. So we're not looking to teach them that. Maybe you would do that with a younger person, but not with an older person. They should get it by now, is my point. What we're trying to do is get somebody who is mentally in the window of opportunity to sell them something. They're open-minded to the ability, and that's the key word, open-minded, to buying a life insurance plan because they have convinced themselves on their own before we showed up that they need to have life insurance, that they need to cover their final expenses, that they don't need to leave some friend or family member with their burial bill that they can't even afford. They've already arrived at this solution on their own without us actually being there. Our presence there, therefore, is just to show them why our opportunity, why our product is better than the other options. And that's where the sales call is focused upon. That's how I sell in this business. The only exception to that is if I'm sitting down with somebody who thinks that they're happy, but I show them ways to have a better experience with what they have. So, for example, if I have somebody who has an overpriced company by the name of American President, I'll let you fill in the blanks. You know what I'm talking about. If I can show that person I can get them a better deal, get them more coverage, get them a better price, well, now I've created or uncovered what was already there, which is also a need to prudently utilize their money that they get, as limited as it is. And so that's the only other exception. Otherwise, what my goal in doing when I'm out here selling final expense is to simply uncover what already exists and massage it with education with facts, with figures, with emotion to some extent, with the conclusion being that Dave's products and his offering is superior to the other guys that are out there that I see all the time on TV and all the time in the mail. And so I say this because if you can understand this difference in selling, it will make a world of difference in your ability to sell more people and sell the people you should sell, which would be, by definition, the prospects, the qualified prospects. And then to minimize your time with the unqualified suspects, because there's nothing you can do to sell a suspect, because they either don't have the need, much like the guy we saw earlier, they don't have the urgency, and they just don't have all the criteria that are necessary to buy and become an owner, because for whatever reason it doesn't make sense. So guys, I want to thank you so much for watching my live stream today. This is Dave Duford, owner of Final Expense Agent Mentor at feagentmentor.com. If you'd like to learn more about the mentorship program, what I'd like to invite you to do is head over to my website, feagentmentor.com, click the contact box at the top, and feel free to send me a message. I'll be happy to send you some more information on how to join the mentorship program, how it works regarding leads, contracts, carriers, you name it, training, the whole ball of wax. If you're happily contracted somewhere else and you're interested in possibly a lead program, sales training programs, not avatars, actually, those are dead, gone now, telemarketing leads, Facebook leads, anything related to lead generation or my official guide to selling final expense book, you can find more about it on the website, and I invite you to check it out and see what you think. Other than that, you guys have a good weekend. Thank you so much for paying attention and watching, and see what I have to say. You guys have a